The Architecture of Political Paradox. An analytical review of the Bronx Town Hall. The inquiry remained suspended within the pressurized atmosphere of the auditorium, mirroring a sharpened blade of historical accountability poised to descend with inevitable weight. This was the pivotal moment of a high-stakes town hall event, situated far from the sterile and curated environments of a Washington, D.C. television studio. The setting was the heart of the Bronx, a district defined by its grit, its labor, and its struggle, the very ground where the Congresswoman had cultivated her image as a champion of the marginalized. The venue was illuminated by the harsh, utilitarian glow of flickering fluorescent lights that hummed with a persistent, irritable energy, much like a swarm of agitated wasps. Within this space sat the working-class families who had sacrificed precious hourly wages to attend, single mothers who had navigated the logistical and financial labyrinth of last-minute childcare, and elderly residents whose physical presence was a silent testament to a lifetime of endurance. They had gathered not to witness a choreographed performance, but to seek genuine articulation for the grievances they carried. They were individuals who had observed the viral photographs and the digital accolades from afar, while their own financial burdens continued to accumulate in a relentless tide of inflation and economic stagnation. They were profoundly exhausted, weary of the perpetual struggle, the unfulfilled promises, and the spectacle of a representative whose lifestyle increasingly diverged from the austerity she prescribed for the nation. On the stage, the visual contrast served as a profound metaphor for the current state of American discourse. 2 chairs, 2 microphones, and 2 diametrically opposed interpretations of the American experience. Senator Ted Cruz maintained a composed, scholarly demeanor, projecting the seasoned patience of a former Supreme Court litigator who had spent a career dissecting complex arguments with surgical precision. He possessed the calculated stillness of a prosecutor, one who had engaged in intellectual combat with the highest-ranking figures in the country and emerged with a reputation for relentless logic. Across from him sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, an individual whose professional styling and designer blazer were carefully calibrated to project the image of a modern, sophisticated revolutionary. As a prominent figure of social media activism, her confidence usually radiated through the glowing screens of millions of smartphones. However, under the direct scrutiny of her own constituents and the unwavering gaze of a legal mind trained to identify inconsistency, that digital bravado seemed to lose its luster. In this live forum, there were no filters, no post-production edits, and no curated captions to soften the impact of a direct question. When she attempted a practiced smile, the one that had garnered millions of likes in a different context, it failed to bridge the palpable gap between her performance and the audience's lived experience. Senator Cruz began his opening salvo by suggesting that the Congresswoman might be fundamentally misinterpreting the optics of her own political messaging. He argued that the issue was not a misunderstanding of political art, but rather a clear-eyed recognition of the facts. He proposed a departure from the idealized versions of herself presented on Instagram and TikTok, urging a confrontation with the authentic Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the version that was now coming into sharp focus for the people of the Bronx. The room fell into a profound, anticipatory silence, the kind that signifies a collective realization that something significant is about to be revealed. Cruz pointed out that while she campaigned under the banner of socialism and called for the dismantling of capitalist structures, her personal choices suggested a deep affinity for the very elite circles she publicly condemned. He framed the ensuing hour as a systematic trial of her integrity, promising to provide 5 distinct proofs of what he characterized as a socialist socialite persona, one who preaches sacrifice for the masses while enjoying the fruits of a capitalist system she ostensibly opposes. Round 1. The semiotics of the Met Gala and the elite enclave. The first piece of evidence materialized on the large screen behind them. A vivid image of the Congresswoman ascending the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art during the Met Gala. She was draped in a custom designer gown, with the slogan, "Tax the Rich," emblazoned in bold, scarlet letters across the back. Surrounded by the zenith of global wealth and celebrity, she appeared to be a seamless participant in an event where ticket prices alone exceeded the annual income of a typical family in her district. Cruz allowed the image to permeate the consciousness of the room, letting the silence emphasize the disparity. He noted the irony of attending an elite gathering, a sanctuary for the ultra-wealthy, while claiming to be an agent of disruption. He questioned the logic of making a statement by indulging in a party defined by extravagant luxury, expensive champagne, and exorbitant fashion. In response, Ocasio-Cortez adopted her earnest, viral-ready tone, arguing that her presence was a strategic infiltration of elite spaces designed to deliver an uncomfortable truth. However, Cruz countered that it was less an act of subversion and more a celebration of her own status within the upper echelons of society. The prosecutor then pivoted to a more somber and evocative comparison, inviting the audience to reflect on their own lives during the evening of that gala. He painted a picture of the stark reality facing the working class, while the Congresswoman was being photographed in her borrowed gown. He spoke of the individuals working double shifts to cover the rising cost of groceries, the parents navigating a failing transit system in the stifling heat, and the families sitting at kitchen tables trying to balance a precarious budget. He described the quiet desperation of a grandmother choosing between essential medication and the monthly rent, and the parents who told their children they weren't hungry so that there would be more food on the table. This contrast, the champagne socialism of the elite versus the daily austerity of the Bronx, created a palpable sense of betrayal. The audience stared at the screen, and for many, the image of the gala no longer represented a viral moment, but a vivid illustration of the distance between their representative and their reality. Cruz continued by dissecting the specific costs associated with such an appearance. He noted that while the dress might have been borrowed, the labor required to prepare for such an event, the professional hairstylists, the makeup artists, the security detail, and the logistical support represented a concentration of wealth that contradicted the message emblazoned on the fabric. He argued that the art of the dress was effectively a commodity, used to enhance her personal brand, rather than to enact policy. This was the first proof, the performance of activism as a substitute for the practice of representation. Round 2. The mathematics of lifestyle and personal wealth. As the discussion shifted to the second round, the focus turned toward the Congresswoman's personal financial disclosures. Cruz produced official documents, reminding the audience that while these records are public, they are rarely examined with the necessary level of scrutiny. He highlighted that a congressional salary alone places an individual in a significantly higher income bracket than the vast majority of Americans, earning in a single year what many of her constituents would not accumulate in 5 years of grueling labor. Furthermore, he questioned the ethics of her campaign finances, specifically the payments made to her partner for marketing consulting services. He asked the audience to consider the meaning of their small-dollar donations, the $20 or $50 contributed by individuals who believed in her message, and suggested that these funds were being used to support a lifestyle of luxury apartments and expensive travel. The narrative of hypocrisy continued with an examination of the Congresswoman's residence and transportation. Cruz described her luxury apartment in the Navy Yard district of Washington, D.C., noting that the rent for such a residence often matches or exceeds the entire annual income of a working family in the Bronx. He then shifted to her choice of vehicle, a high-end electric Tesla, valued at over $60,000. He contrasted this luxury with the daily experience of her constituents, who rely on a crumbling and unreliable subway system. He argued that lecturing the poor about their privilege while driving an expensive status symbol was the pinnacle of political arrogance. A young man in the audience, a college graduate struggling with debt and stagnant wages, spoke of his daily struggle on the overcrowded and sweltering trains. He noted the irony of a representative who claims to share his struggle while enjoying a level of mobility and comfort that he could only dream of achieving. Cruz pushed further, addressing the psychological concept of cognitive dissonance. He questioned how one can advocate for the total redistribution of wealth while personally accumulating the trappings of the wealthy class. He pointed out that the Congresswoman's lifestyle was not merely a personal choice, but a political statement that undermined her credibility. This was the second proof: the discrepancy between the socialist rhetoric and the capitalist reality of her personal existence. Round 3. The Ghost of Opportunity and the Amazon HQ2 debacle. The third round of the debate addressed the controversial cancellation of the Amazon HQ2 project in New York City. This was an event that Ocasio-Cortez had celebrated as a landmark victory against corporate greed. The screens displayed her triumphant social media posts from that day, where she declared that anything is possible. However, Cruz reframed this victory as a catastrophic loss of 25,000 potential jobs and billions of dollars in economic investment. He spoke of the careers that were never launched, the construction projects that were never started, and the local businesses that never had the opportunity to grow. He highlighted the stories of parents who had hoped their children could find high-paying jobs within their own community, only to see those opportunities move to Virginia. Cruz introduced the economic concept of the multiplier effect, explaining how those 25,000 jobs would have supported thousands of other small businesses, delis, dry cleaners, daycare centers, and local contractors. By killing the deal, he argued, she had not defeated Jeff Bezos. She had defeated the aspirations of her own neighbors. A construction worker in the room shared his grief over the loss of a project that would have allowed him to work alongside his son, building a future for their family. He pointed out that while Virginia's economy thrived from the investment, the Bronx was left with nothing but the echoes of a viral tweet and the reality of missed opportunity. Cruz noted that this was the third proof: the prioritization of ideological purity and digital engagement over the material prosperity of the working class. He characterized her celebration as a form of performative governance, where the goal is to look like a revolutionary on social media, even if it results in the impoverishment of the people you represent. Round 4. The Ethics of Narrative and the Exploitation of Familial Suffering. The fourth round of this forensic examination delved into a territory that was as emotionally fraught as it was ethically revealing: the utilization of personal family tragedy as a vehicle for political fundraising and digital engagement. Senator Cruz directed the audience's attention to a series of photographs that had circulated widely on the Congresswoman's social media platforms. The images depicted the ancestral home of her grandmother in Puerto Rico, a structure still bearing the visible scars of Hurricane Maria, missing roof tiles, encroaching mold, and the pervasive gray of structural neglect. Ocasio-Cortez had used these images to launch a scathing critique of the federal government's disaster response, framing her grandmother's suffering as a microcosm of systemic colonial indifference. However, the senator's critique was not directed at the validity of the hurricane's devastation, but at the moral dissonance of the Congresswoman's response. He argued that, for a representative earning a six-figure salary with a net worth that has steadily climbed during her tenure, the failure to personally finance the repairs of her own grandmother's roof was a staggering choice. In the realm of ethics, this represents the instrumentalization of trauma, where a leader finds more political utility in a problem that remains unsolved than in a solution that remains private. Cruz pointed out that the cost of these repairs, while significant for a working-class family, would have been a manageable expense for someone with Ocasio-Cortez's income and access to credit. The debate intensified as Cruz revealed the details of a 2021 controversy involving a third-party fundraiser. When a conservative commentator launched a GoFundMe campaign that quickly raised over $100,000 to repair the home, the Congresswoman did not welcome the relief for her relative. Instead, she dismissed the effort as a political stunt and ensured the funds were returned. To the audience in the Bronx, this was a moment of profound clarity. They saw a grandmother who continued to live under a leaking roof because her granddaughter deemed the source of the help politically inconvenient. In the cultural fabric of the Bronx, where family loyalty and the care of elders are paramount, this was viewed as a betrayal of the highest order. It suggested that in the Instagram economy, a leaking roof is a content asset that generates likes, donations, and outrage, whereas a fixed roof is merely a quiet, private victory that serves no brand. Cruz argued that this was the fourth proof of a fundamental character flaw: the willingness to prioritize the aesthetic of neglect over the efficacy of action. He suggested that Ocasio-Cortez had successfully monetized her grandmother's pain to build a national brand, while the woman herself remained in a state of precarity. This trauma as content model reveals a cynical reality of modern activism that for the influencer, the suffering of the constituents, or even the family, is the primary fuel for the machine of fame. Round 5. The Green New Deal and the Carbon Class System. The final round addressed the centerpiece of the Congresswoman's legislative identity, the Green New Deal, GND. This policy framework, while presented as an existential necessity for the survival of the planet, was analyzed by Senator Cruz as a manifesto of selective austerity. He argued that the GND is essentially a blueprint for a carbon class system, where the mandates for sacrifice are directed exclusively at the working class, while the architects of those mandates remain insulated by their wealth and status. The senator focused on the practical implications for the Bronx. He spoke of the transition inequity inherent in the plan's requirements. For example, the GND's push for a total shift to electric vehicles, EVs, by 2030 imposes a financial burden that is mathematically impossible for many. He cited the cost of the average EV, which, despite subsidies, remains out of reach for families living paycheck to paycheck. He then juxtaposed this with Ocasio-Cortez's own $60,000 Tesla. He argued that driving a luxury electric vehicle is not a sacrifice. It is a virtue signal available only to the affluent. For the plumber who relies on a 2015 gas-powered Ford Transit to transport his tools, the GND is not a green dream. It is a death sentence for his business. To illustrate the economic impact, Cruz briefly touched upon the marginal cost of abatement, using the following equation to show how the burden falls disproportionately on those with the least capital. $C, marginal equals frac, delta cost, transition, delta CO, 2, reduced, $. He explained that, for a working-class family, the delta cost, transition, represents a massive percentage of their total liquidity, often exceeding their annual savings. Meanwhile, for a member of the political elite, that same cost is negligible. This creates a society where sustainability becomes a luxury good, and carbon credits become a form of indulgence that the rich can buy to maintain their lifestyle, while the poor are forced to walk or take a failing subway. A man in the audience, a father of 3 who works as a delivery driver, spoke of his climate anxiety, not the fear of rising tides, but the fear of rising costs. He noted that, The regulations already being discussed would make his current vehicle illegal to drive in parts of the city, and the cost of a compliant vehicle would take 10 years of his income to pay off. The Congresswoman's response, which focused on systemic transformation and green jobs, felt disconnected from the immediate, visceral fear of a man whose livelihood was being regulated into the ground. Cruz concluded the fifth round by highlighting the exemption economy. He produced travel records showing that Ocasio-Cortez, despite her rhetoric regarding the carbon footprint of air travel, remains a frequent flyer. He argued that the rules for thee, but not for me pattern was now complete. From the Met Gala to the Tesla, and from the Amazon jobs to the Puerto Rican roof, the evidence pointed to a single conclusion. The Congresswoman represents a new class of political aristocrats who use the language of the poor to consolidate the power of the rich. The broader pattern, the architecture of the squad, and the influencer politician, the Bronx Town Hall, was not merely an indictment of a single individual. It was a revelation of a systemic shift in the American representative model. Ocasio-Cortez is the vanguard of a movement that has replaced constituent service with digital engagement. This movement, often referred to as the Squad, operates on a shared set of principles that Senator Cruz characterized as the industrial celebrity complex of Washington. In this model, the politician functions as a brand manager. Their success is not measured by the passage of legislation or the material improvement of their district, but by the growth of their follower count and their ability to stay trending. This creates a dangerous incentive structure, because outrage is the primary currency of social media. These politicians are incentivized to keep their constituents angry and struggling. A satisfied, prosperous constituency is a quiet one. A quiet constituency does not provide the viral content necessary to maintain a national profile. Cruz expanded his analysis to other members of this progressive vanguard. He mentioned Ilhan Omar, whose rhetoric regarding defunding the police has had devastating consequences for the safety of her Minneapolis district, yet she has spent millions of dollars on private security, a luxury her constituents cannot afford. He pointed to Bernie Sanders, the self-proclaimed enemy of the millionaires and billionaires, who became a multi-millionaire himself and owns 3 houses, including a luxury lakefront property. This is the proletarian pretension, a strategy where the leader adopts the grievances of the working class while living the life of the bourgeoisie. The senator argued that this model is fundamentally corrosive to democracy. It replaces representative governance with performative governance. In the Bronx, this meant that the real problems of the people, the lack of jobs, the rising crime, and the failing schools were treated as props for the Congresswoman's next TikTok video. The town hall exposed the fact that the revolution will not be televised. It will be posted, liked, and monetized by those at the top, while those at the bottom are left with the bill. The philosophical crisis. The death of authenticity. As the evening drew to a close, the discussion moved into a deeper philosophical territory, the crisis of authenticity in the digital age. Cruz argued that we are living in an era of hyper-reality, where the image of a person, the Instagram, AOC, has become more real to the public than the actual person and their actions. The socialist socialite thrives in this gap between image and reality. She can wear a dress that says, "Tax the rich while being the rich," and her followers will see the dress, not the person. This is the ultimate fraud, the belief that saying the right thing is the same as doing the right thing. The Bronx constituents, however, were beginning to experience the authenticity decay of this model. They were seeing that the hashtags didn't fix the subway, the viral tweets didn't bring the 25,000 Amazon jobs back, and the Instagram stories didn't repair the roof in Puerto Rico. They were realizing that they had been sold a digital utopia while living in a material dystopia. The senator's final address to the audience was a call to unfollow the fraud. He argued that the only way to restore the American Republic is to return to a model of representation based on material accountability. He urged the voters to look past the filters and the slogans and to ask one simple question: is my life better because of this person? Or is their life just better because of me? The town hall concluded not with a roar of approval, but with a somber, thoughtful silence. The socialist socialite had been unmasked, not by an opponent's rhetoric, but by the undeniable weight of her own contradictions. The champagne socialist was revealed to be exactly what she was: a typical politician in a revolutionary's clothing, using the struggles of the Bronx to fund a life in the Navy Yard. The career of the Congresswoman from Instagram was not ended by a vote that night, but its foundation of moral authority was shattered. The people of the Bronx had seen the man behind the curtain, or in this case, the billionaire behind the dress, and they would never be able to unsee it. The legislative mirage. An empirical audit of record and result. As the town hall progressed into its final phase, Senator Cruz shifted the focus from personal lifestyle to the quantifiable metrics of legislative efficacy. In the realm of political science, the primary duty of a representative is the legislative function, the ability to draft, negotiate, and pass laws that provide tangible benefits to their district. However, an empirical audit of the Congresswoman's tenure reveals a startling divergence between her digital output and her legislative input. Cruz presented a comparative analysis of her record against that of her peers, highlighting what he termed the inertia of the influencer. While the Congresswoman has introduced numerous bills with high-resonance titles, such as the Green New Deal or various anti-poverty acts, the majority of these documents never advance past the committee stage. In fact, her success rate in terms of passing substantive legislation is statistically lower than that of many freshman representatives who lack her media profile. This phenomenon is known as vapor law, legislation designed not to be passed, but to be posted. The bills are drafted with maximalist language that makes them politically impossible to negotiate, but provides excellent, shareable content for a base that values ideological purity over incremental progress. Cruz pointed out that while she was busy generating viral moments in committee hearings, the Bronx was suffering from a lack of federal investment in basic infrastructure. He contrasted her record with that of traditional workhorse politicians who, despite having no social media following, have successfully secured millions in federal grants for local hospitals, bridge repairs, and vocational training centers. The tragedy of the Bronx is that its representative has prioritized national stature over local utility. By positioning herself as the face of a global movement, she has essentially orphaned her district. The residents are left with a representative who is famous everywhere except where it matters in the rooms where the actual federal budget is decided. The micro-donation paradox. The ethics of small-dollar exploitation. One of the most insidious aspects of the socialist socialite model is the mechanism of its funding. During the town hall, a significant portion of the audience expressed frustration over the perceived misuse of their financial support. Cruz addressed this through an analysis of aggregated microcapitalism. The Congresswoman's campaign is famously powered by small-dollar donors, waitresses, teachers, and hourly workers who believe their $5 or $10 is contributing to a people's revolution. However, a forensic look at her campaign expenditures reveals that these funds are frequently diverted into a consultancy ecosystem that mirrors the very corporate structures she decries. From high-end digital marketing firms to expensive travel and security details for her partner, the money of the poor is effectively being used to subsidize the lifestyles of a new political elite. In ethical philosophy, this is a violation of the duty of stewardship. When a leader accepts money from those who have very little, they carry a heightened moral obligation to ensure those funds are used for the direct benefit of the donor. Instead, the Bronx Town Hall revealed a pattern of brand enrichment. The money is used to keep the influencer viral, which in turn brings in more money, creating a self-sustaining cycle of wealth that never trickles down to the district. Cruz argued that this is the most cynical form of capitalism, a system that monetizes the hope of the impoverished to maintain the status of the revolutionary. The woman who donated her last $50 to fight the rich was, in reality, paying for the professional lighting and camera crew that captured the Congresswoman's next authentic video. This revelation hit the audience with the force of a physical blow, as they realized they weren't just followers, they were customers of a political product that offered no returns. The Great Realignment, the shifting youth vote, and the demand for substance. Perhaps the most culturally significant moment of the evening occurred when the senator addressed the realignment of the youth. For years, the progressive movement has relied on the unwavering support of Gen Z and millennial voters, who were drawn to the aesthetic of the social media sensation. However, the Bronx Town Hall highlighted a growing fatigue among these demographics. As these young people face the material reality of an economy defined by high inflation and unattainable housing, the allure of the socialist influencer is beginning to fade. Cruz noted that for a 25-year-old living in the Bronx, a viral tweet about equity does nothing to lower their rent or improve their job prospects. This demographic is beginning to shift toward a more results-oriented pragmatism. They are no longer satisfied with representation that is purely symbolic. They want a representative who can actually lower the cost of living and create a pathway to the middle class. The young man in the audience who spoke of his disillusionment was a bellwether for this shift. He represented a generation that is tired of performing their struggle and ready to solve it. This realignment poses a terminal threat to the socialist socialite model. When the young stop clicking and start counting, the influencer loses their primary source of power. The Bronx Town Hall showed that the digital shield that has protected the Congresswoman from criticism is beginning to crack. The youth are realizing that ideological purity is a luxury for the rich, while economic growth is a necessity for the rest. The final verdict: the end of the filtered era. As the town hall drew to a close, the atmosphere in the Bronx was one of somber reflection rather than partisan celebration. The 5 rounds of the debate had functioned as a meticulous deconstruction of a modern political myth. Through the lens of the Met Gala, the luxury lifestyle, the Amazon jobs, the family exploitation, and the Green New Deal paradox, Senator Ted Cruz had illustrated a single overarching truth. The socialist socialite is a creation of the image-obsessed era, a figure whose substance is entirely contained within her screen. The final proof of this was the Congresswoman's own response to the evidence. Throughout the evening, she had relied on the rhetorical tools of her digital platform deflection, emotional appeal, and the use of jargon. But in the face of raw facts and the lived experience of her constituents, these tools were rendered ineffective. The TikTok voice could not explain away the $60,000 Tesla to a man whose subway train hadn't run on time in months. The Instagram smile could not justify the rejection of 25,000 jobs to a father watching his son struggle. In his closing remarks, Cruz didn't just attack a person. He attacked a corruptive model of governance. He warned that if America continues to elect influencers instead of representatives, the country will continue to see its working class hollowed out, while its political elite grows more famous and more disconnected. He urged the people of the Bronx to reclaim their voice, not the voice that speaks in hashtags, but the voice that speaks in votes, in demands for accountability, and in the insistence that their leaders live the same lives they do. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez left the stage that night not as a revolutionary hero, but as a politician who had been found wanting. The Champagne Socialist had been unmasked, and the Congresswoman from Instagram had been revealed as a fraud. The career of the individual may continue, protected by the structural advantages of a safe district and a sympathetic media. But her moral authority had been decisively broken. The Bronx Town Hall of 2026 will be remembered as the moment when the social media revolution met the material reality, and reality finally won. The legacy of this event is a new standard for American politics: the end of the filter. Voters are no longer content to see a representative through the lens of a smartphone screen. They want to see them on the subway, in the grocery store, and on the legislative floor, doing the difficult, unglamorous work of making life better. The socialist socialite era is over. The era of results has begun.